All right, Nick Kirby here. Welcome to a very special edition of Chatterbox Reds. I am joined by James Fox on the other side of the world. We're going to talk some Reds baseball. We'll get to James here in just a second, but as always, Chatterbox Reds is proudly sponsored by Deep South Commodities. DSC is a leader in renewable commodities for biofuel production, specializing in used cooking oil collection, aggregation, and sales. Visit www.deepsouthcommodities.com for more information. Thanks so much to John and all of our friends over at DSC. But James Fox is with me. James reached out to me a week or two ago. We've been emailing, corresponding back and forth. James has done some incredible research that I'm really excited to share with you guys, kind of talk through, pick James's brain on how he kind of came up with all these numbers and this analysis on the Reds. But James, first and foremost, tell the world where you are.
So, hi everybody. I'm James. I'm currently in a hotel in Belgium, working on an exercise with NATO. But typically, I live in London. So, I'm an avid Chatterbox fan. Usually a podcast consumer. So, quite ironic that I created some graphics for you to display here in a different medium. But yeah, I'm a NATO. I'm working in NATO right now, but I'm a naval intelligence officer. So it's been a really fun career. I'm about to retire here next year. So yeah, I grew up in Cincinnati, in the northern Kentucky area. So yeah, I've been a Reds fan for all my life, for better or worse. But yeah, I've got to spend about a decade of my career overseas, living in Europe, between Germany, the UK, the Middle East. So followed the Reds everywhere I've ever been, and that's not going to change.
Well, that's fantastic. I think James, you help our international viewership exponentially. So we really appreciate that, and it's so cool that people all over the world are interested in the same things that I know everyone who watches and listens to Chatterbox Reds is interested as well. But let's get into talking some baseball, James, because I got a hunch you probably don't get a whole lot of people that you can talk Reds baseball with over there. So we'll hopefully fill a little bit of that void here in our time together. But you just did this incredible work, this incredible research with some graphics here. Let me pull them up. There we go. So this is like, if you're familiar, and again, to the podcast listeners, I'm going to put all these graphics up on the Chatterbox Twitter page, and we'll also put them on Facebook as well, so you can check that out and get an actual visual of them. But we'll talk through it nonetheless, and make sure you're caught up to speed. But James, you've created what looks like a normal StatCast data point for a player, and you've put all of this information into our scaled system. Walk me through exactly what you did here.
All right. So what I do for my day job is a lot of value analysis and benchmarking. So it's all about asking the right questions. So what you're used to seeing on Savant is a percentile system. So what you're taking is a data array, and you're placing where a player's performance is based on whatever you're analyzing, whether that's exit velocity or whatever the standard statistical things you're interested in when you look at a Savant page. And then if you're a baseball stat nerd like us, then you're looking at Fangraphs data a lot, so you can understand kind of benchmarking to the league average. So what I wanted to do is take a look at the Reds as a holistic approach. So how are we doing on offense? How are we doing on defense? And how do we split that out so we can kind of tee up for the off season what needs to be addressed?
Yeah, so I really love how it's kind of laid out here. So let's start up at the very top. So obviously, the position player war and the pitcher war, quite a big difference. And for those who aren't familiar, war stands for wins above replacement. The basis of it is how much you are worth. Ellie De La Cruz was worth about 7 wins this year. I think Noelvi Marte was worth about -1 wins this year. So that's kind of the gap for us. And I think most of us can understand. Yeah, I mean, Noelvi Marte felt like a negative. He was below a replacement level player. Ellie De La Cruz was significantly above a replacement level player. So the pitching war, I mean, looks great. I mean, you can't beat that. Obviously, the position player war, there's a lot that goes into that. And that's, and you kind of have to dig a lot deeper to find what you got to that. So,
So on the pitching war, that's really interesting because Baseball Reference and Fangraphs use really different approaches. So I use Fangraphs data for all this. I think the important thing to note for pitching war is that it's based off of FIP, so fielding independent pitching. So it heavily weights against pitchers who have high homer and walk rates. So when you look at Hunter Green's fantastic season, he was only at 3.8 wins per Fangraphs model, but with Baseball Reference, they had him at 6.3 wins. So not to jump ahead all the way to the pitching already, but when you factor in that the Fangraphs had the Reds starting rotation at the 12th in baseball, if you use Hunter Green's Baseball Reference instead of Fangraphs WAR, that brings Reds starting rotation all the way up to 6th in Major League Baseball. So even though the relievers kind of carried the weight of the WAR for the team, which is also an interesting story, that Reds pitching was super effective this last year.
yeah, and you also factor in too that the pitching, I don't want to say they mailed it at the end of the year, but I mean the Reds were out of it. They shut down Hunter Green, Nick Lodolo, Andrew Abbott, for quite a big length, and who knows if they were in a playoff race, if they would have been more aggressive trying to get those guys back. I know Hunter Green came back for a tiny bit at the end of the season, but you know, it felt like they got to these numbers, James, and they didn't even really go full 100% effort to get to that. And obviously, the Reds also traded Lucas Sims at the trade deadline, and Fangraphs really values Lucas Sims. So he would have added quite a bit, to that mix. So that's kind of interesting.
So
The off, yeah,
on the
go ahead.
offensive side, I think what really stands out to me is so I started with batted ball metrics that would display, how did the offense do, and then when you calculate base running in there, you see just how astoundingly good the Reds were at base running. So I think one thing we need to be careful of as Reds fans was the base running narrative when Tito got hired. So I'm stoked that Tito's the new manager. I think having a different cultural approach is going to be fantastic for this team. But I think getting angry at people for trying to take the extra base and getting thrown out is a little bit overblown, because the Reds on the whole, because this base running metric, it covers everything you can imagine as a base runner. So from being able to steal bases to being able to take the extra bases to probability of sacrifice flies. So Reds just did an extraordinary job, and that's the 97 percentile equates to second best in Major League Baseball. So backing up to the hitting, when you're assessing how the Reds did with weighted runs created plus. So for those that don't know, we don't really talk about the components of WRC plus, but it's a good value metric for how a player is doing in comparison to the rest of the league. But the runs created model is over total bases. So it factors in total bases with bats and hits and walks. So that just tells you how you're doing with the bat. But really, when you look at the Reds being in the 48th percentile of runs scored and only being that low with WRC plus, that tells you how valuable that base running was as a team. So I think that aggressive base running with athletes the Reds have on this team is a really good thing going forward.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that, without the aggressive base running, I mean, this team might have really struggled to score runs, even more so than it felt like they might have at times. So yeah, that's certainly fascinating. I know, like, with the weighted runs created plus stat, it feels like there was a lot of things that just went wrong in that particular and just the overall offense, with guys underperforming and then key guys like McLean and CES getting hurt. CES is a guy that I really believe in, and I think he's the kind of guy that I don't think he's going to have the Ellie effect that kind of pushes you quite a bit up that base running chart. But I think just him being healthy and McLean too would really boost that up quite a bit. But it is disappointing to see 87th 87 WRC plus 14th percentile, because really that's been a problem for the Reds for the better part of the last 10-12 years.
Yeah. I think another important note here is just how unlucky the Reds were with batted balls in play. So, for those that don't know about BAPIP, you have a pretty astute viewership here and podcast listenership. But it's basically saying what your luck is on batted balls in play, and the Reds were really unlucky. So, as opposed to 2023 when they were very lucky. So, next year, hopefully the pendulum swings the other way. So it's not just getting players returning to health, but it's getting more of those balls to fall down and play and get on base that way.
Yeah, and that was something I tried to talk about throughout the year, and it did feel like two things can be true. The Reds were not a great offense as it was, but they also, on top of that, had really really crappy luck. So what you're with the batted ball data, the Reds probably should have been in the 30th percentile. Or maybe the 25th, 30, something around that. But say they were in the 14th. So it was just kind of a culmination, in my opinion, of both things happening. You had some guys that didn't perform well. There was maybe some poor roster construction, this, that, and the other that contributed to that. But then on top of that, you had the bad luck, kind of the recipe for what turned out to be the 2024 Reds.
Yeah, and when we get to the position groupings in a little bit here, we can talk about kind of which position groups stood out as really good performers and which were just awful, just struggled. But yeah, if you want, if we can move back to the pitching here. So I think really we went over how the starters and relievers did really well, and the rotation is in a good spot, even with some of the injuries that are coming up for 2025 with the depth between Williamson and Aguiar. What the Reds are returning is just phenomenal. But I still think there's room this offseason that you need bulk innings eaters. So I think the Reds will acquire at least one starting pitcher, and Nick Martinez would be an excellent option if he'll accept a qualifying offer, if the Reds will extend him a qualifying offer. That just being able to eat multiple innings and go over 100 innings in a year is a very valuable person to have. But on the pitching front, look through Fangraphs data and try to identify what was the Reds' approach. So there's a couple people on Reds Twitter that will focus on meaningful stats of what will indicate a quality pitcher. So one of the things we were looking at with Great American Ballpark was, hey, we want ground ball pitchers, but that actually turns out to be the opposite of the Reds' philosophy. So not pictured because I was limited on how many percentile bars. As a former pitcher myself, I didn't want to focus too much on pitching. But the Reds were actually in the first percentile in ground ball rate. So they led the majors in not giving up ground balls. But what they are focused on is limiting hard hit rate. And what's interesting about the hard hit rate is it's not based off exit velocity. It's kind of a combined statistic to go over how long a ball's hang time is in the air, how far it's traveled. So the Reds do a really good job as a pitching staff on just limiting that hard hit ball. So I think that stands out, and it's kind of the opposite of what we think would play in Great American. Hey, you got Elliott, shortstop. He can cover lots of ground. Let's get a whole bunch of ground balls and get our outs that way. But the Reds' philosophy is really to limit hard contact.
Well, and when you get down to the next one, outside of LEU, you see maybe why that is the best strategy. Because as I've tried to preach as many times as I can, the defense has been a massive problem for the Reds, and I firmly believe, as we're getting into November, that the Reds need to improve their defense even more than their offense. I really believe that. You look at like a team like the Guardians, their offensive numbers weren't much better than the Reds. In some cases, the Reds, you could make a case the Reds have a better offense. But defensively, I mean, it's night and day. And those runs add up. They really do. And I also just don't see like with the current crop as it is. Like I see a lot of upside still in Christian Encarnacion Strand. And you could go through a lot of different offensive guys. And and some guys I think we're gonna bounce back. I don't see, other than Matt McLean, I don't see a whole lot of just natural improvements defensively. So when we're talking about free agents and trades, I think you have to, defense has to be a massive part of that equation, or you're really just upgrading marginally in a lot of places, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Nick, and I think you've been pounding the drum on this all off season. Is that the Reds need to get better defensively. So just as I pointed out, the base running rose the complete Reds offense from their lack of hitting. You have the opposite going on here. You have fantastic pitching, and the fielding is just dragging the team down. So with OIA, fielding run value, and defense run saved, they're all similar metrics, but the outcome is one's looking at outs and the other one's looking at runs, and they're weighted differently. But I included all three so you can kind of get a survey of the three decent statistical measures that we have for defense. The Reds just graded out so poorly on all three, which is something that needs to get improved upon for this offseason. So really a trick for the Reds this offseason is how do you get better defensively and offensively at the same time? So that's not easy to do. Those players are not cheap. And really, I don't think some of the players that you see nominate on Red's Twitter sphere is they're not going to cut it. So even though Santander would be a great bat to have in the lineup, he's not improving the defense. So Reds probably, in my estimation, will probably go after the trade market so they can fill some of these gaps. And when we move on to the next graphic, I think you'll see where the Reds can target to make that more effective.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move ahead. This is what's really cool that you did, is you did a full position breakdown on each position and kind of where the Reds rank. And obviously, you start off with Ellie De La Cruz. I mean, you don't get much better than that. 90th percentile in wins above replacement, 79th percentile in weighted runs created plus, 93rd percentile in fielding run value. So, I mean, for your first full season in the big leagues, I think that'll play. There's a lot of blue all around, but let's start with the positive. And a guy that I continue to think has gotten really undervalued out of nowhere in Jonathan India. We also want to remind you that you can call or text 988 anytime, day or night. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is a place to get support for anything related to mental health, whether it's an immediate crisis, simply wanting to find out how to connect with care, or anything in between. It's a 100% confidential, secure, and an anonymous way to reach out for help when you don't know where else to turn. To connect, call or text 988 or visit mantherapy.org to get help. It's okay not to be okay. The guy that I continue to think has gotten really undervalued out of nowhere in Jonathan India. He's 85th percentile in wins over replacement, 93rd percentile in weighted runs created plus, 37th percentile in fielding runs value, which I think is probably a better gauge of where he is than that nice little, I think it was plus 1 outs above average that he ended at. But Jonathan India, I think somehow he's become underrated.
Yeah, I completely agree. The two things that stood out to me when I first did this was Ellie first and foremost, just how incredibly valuable he is, and I really laugh at anybody suggesting that he should move off the position because shortstops as a whole, they bat at above league average, and he's way better than them. And then they also field above average, and he was one of the best shortstops in baseball on top of his base running. I mean, we have an amazing talent in Cincinnati. I'm so grateful for that. So he's just exciting. But yeah, you're right. My biggest finding here is my personal bias is that Jonathan India is a fun player. He's, I thought, around league average bat. Everybody lauds his leadership abilities, which is fantastic. You need those cultural pieces in the clubhouse, but I didn't value him in the sense of being elite. But after breaking this down compared to the rest of the second base position groups, I mean, he just did tremendous. Even when you peel the onion back a couple layers deep here, Santiago Espinal had his worst moments of the season as a second baseman. So Espinal dragged these numbers down, if you can believe it. So Jonathan India creating a 3.3 WAR while he was a second baseman is just tremendous value. But that also leads into some of the things you're seeing right now in the Arizona Fall League and some of the Matt McLain discussion points, because similar to Espinal struggling while he was playing second base, India excelled at second base, but he struggled as DH. So some of these guys, I think, are more in tune with the game. Their vibes are flowing. Just they're better when they're in the field. And so just locking India into like a DH spot next year, he actually has proven that that's not his preferred way of going about it. So I know it's not popular to talk about McLain moving off second base, but you see why the Reds would consider it when you look at India's positional value at second base. It's just so valuable.
Yeah, and it was a mixed bag with him defensively, metrics wise. Outs above average, I think he was +1. Defensive run saves, I think he might have been -6. I try not to put too much stock into 1 year samples for players because I think that you can find some really fluky stuff. Um, I still really I would like to see India play first base. They had him doing that in spring training. I know when I got down to Arizona last year, he was playing first base. I mean, I didn't see a whole lot of it, but he looked fine there. I feel like he could be a solid first baseman. I really do. So I would kind of like to see that, but um, it goes against so much because we had felt for so long that he was not a second baseman. But when you look at numbers like this, it's kind of hard to be like, well, I mean, he was actually one of the two bright spots positionally. Well, I guess three. Tyler Stevenson
3.
certainly
Yeah.
certainly is in there. I sorry, Tyler, my apologies. But yeah, I mean, it definitely stands out.
Yeah, so speaking of Tyler Stevenson, the reason I use fielding run value is because it's the only defensive metric that's applied to every position. So you can't use OAA because it doesn't exist with catchers. So with that being said, Luke Maley just did not have a good season. We don't need to list off his offensive accomplishments or lack thereof. But he was also not great on any of the defensive metrics out there. So Tyler Stevenson just had a crazy good year, especially when you look at the catcher position producing WRC plus at the 90 level. To have a catcher doing well above that is just really good value. Before moving on to like the deep blue stuff, another surprise for me was right field. I assumed just with the eye test that right field would be a problem, but it wasn't as horrific as I remembered. So I'm not as concerned about right field as I was going into this analysis.
I think Jake Fraley defense was actually pretty solid, graded out pretty well. Um, he had a really weird season. Jake Fraley did, and um, there's just so many pieces on this team that you can on from, and it wouldn't be anything super contradictional, but you also could keep, and you can certainly, you don't have to squint too hard to see how it could improve quite a bit. Um, so yeah, and you know, you look around the diamond, you know, center field looks rough, but I mean, you certainly expect that TJ Frieda would be better than that. I mean, he had almost 2 seasons, a season and a half where he played at an all-star level. And he was just hurt so much last year. But again, the problem is he's been hurt. And I think more than anything, James, this shows how important it is to have someone behind your guy
Exactly.
that
It,
has some real value.
I think another surprise for me is center field when you broke it down by game and performance. Guess what Will Benson's WRC plus was as a center fielder?
Oh God, I don't want to know. He only played center field mostly at the beginning of the year, so it had to be really bad.
No, it was actually the exact opposite.
It,
So Will Benson was all-star caliber, 138 WRC plus as a center fielder. So when he transitioned to right field, it's when he had his woes, as well as when he DH'd. So yeah, the WRC plus is kind of propped up there by Will Benson's 40-ish games he played in center with that 138 WRC plus. TJ Friedel just there's no other way to split it. He had a rough year compared to his 2023, especially fielding. So when you look at the just overall average MLB center field position group, you're looking at a really good glove and a mediocre bat. Um, so Reds didn't even come close to that. So the Stuart Fairchild, you know, while he is okay with the glove out there, he didn't provide any value out there really. I know he was miscast in that role when he was forced to, you know, with his opposite handedness preference, and he wasn't able to do that all year, and he was asked to play. But it really drug down the position. So I think if you're looking for the offseason and what the Reds really need to improve upon, I think a glove in center field and third base would be the best value, where the rest of the league puts their competent fielders, and uh, that's where I would focus. And once again, I don't think you're going to find that with the current offerings on the trade market, or sorry, on the current offerings on the free agent market, that you'll need to pursue it in the trade market.
The most interesting thing with TJ Friedel is his sprint speed. So in 2023 and pretty much every year prior, he was in the 70s. He was 74th percentile in 2023. Well, in 2024, he was in the 26th percentile. So I don't know if it was injuries or what, but his speed was just drastically down. I don't think a guy just aged from the 70th percentile to the 20th in 1 year. I don't think that's possible. I don't. Maybe it is. So I hope that it was just something injury wise that he can kind of regain or at least get back up into the 50th or 60th percentile. And I wonder how much of that would fix a lot of his game.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think there's a couple of Reds players that statistics you can kind of, I won't say disregard, but you can lower how much stock you put into it. So Christian Encarnacion Strand, yeah, he was playing hurt. Even in his small sample size, he was playing. Same with TJ Friedel, as you noted, the sprint speeds, the tell. It's, you know, you can't go from having good speed to you're absolutely flat-footed and just unathletic after that. So um, he hopefully has an off season where he can return to health. But we've seen him be a really quality glove in the past. But I think if I'm the Reds with his age and the curve and the expectations and he has had a challenge staying healthy, that maybe moving him to left field with his chaos approach would be great all around. So if you can bring in a center fielder that has a good glove and can hit some, and then you move TJ over to left field, um, I think you're improving two positions at once when you do that.
It's kind of an interesting thing of looking at it is, you know, you make TJ Friedel a left fielder, potentially a fourth outfielder if he doesn't perform, and you know, one of your other plethora of options of guys that probably are going to be penciled in to start at AAA, but maybe one of them has a breakout. I mean, I don't think it would be too far-fetched to say Blake Dunn comes to spring and has a great spring, or I know people hate it, Will Benson or Joey Weimer. I mean, there's definitely some talent there. That would be interesting. And then TJ Friedel would be your backup center fielder. And that would kind of fill that backup need that has been really plagued the Reds, is just when a player goes down, I mean, there's nothing behind them. And that's, I think, what really just kind of caught up with the Reds as much as anything. But where are you at on Spencer Steer? Because he had such an interesting year. I think people thought he was better than his overall numbers ended at the end of the year. I mean, he had a below average WRC plus. He doesn't play good defense. I think he was a little bit better, but I Spencer Steer concerns me a little bit, that there's a possibility that he's peaked, just because he doesn't have those gaudy minor league numbers like Christian Encarnacion Strand or Ellie De La Cruz have.
Yeah, I think Spencer Steer is incredibly valuable in ways that I didn't realize before I did this analysis. So, not as drastic as India, my findings with Jonathan India being extremely valuable, but Steer, we go back to his fielding, how, there's some adventures out in left field. Well, when you do this, when you take a look at league-wide left field play, you realize he's actually above average in left field, even though he's a negative run value out there. So when you benchmark it against the league standard, being better than the league standard, what does that tell you about his glove? It's not as impactful as you think it would be. But then you look at the WRC plus, and I know Spencer Steer played a lot more than just left field, but he had a 90 WRC plus when he was out there. And when you look at the league average of 101, typically what teams are doing are putting a better thumper, a better bat out there with a lesser glove. So Spencer, slightly better than we give him credit for on the defensive side, but the offense needs to raise to a more effective level. But with his batted ball data, I think he was unlucky. I think he had similar profiles between 23 and 24. So I think there's a good chance in 25 that he could return to the levels he was at in 23. And by the way, if you look at his Savant page, with his batting run value, Spencer Steer graded out really well.
That's a really good point on the left field that I probably don't consider enough, is the fact that, yeah, you might have a guy that's a -2 or 3, but teams across baseball are putting guys that are -2, 3, 4, 5 out in left field for a reason. So he probably should be more compared to the rest of the league and what other teams are doing, versus just that blanket he's a -3 outs above average or defensive run saved. I did find something very interesting on Steer's Savant page. When you go to similar batters to Spencer Steer, the first two of the first three that come up, the first one is Jonathan India 2023 and Jake Fraley 2023. So that's pretty fascinating in itself. But James, any other kind of final takeaways from this?
Yeah, the bads. So first base, DH, and third base. And I don't know if it was talked enough about, but the Reds were the worst position group of any position group at DH. So the worst in baseball of any position group. So that has to improve. So the narrative around what the Reds have and what they can use for player development and what they currently have with players returning to health, there's been a focus of, well, the Reds have too many DHs. Well, as of last year, they didn't have any. So that needs to improve dramatically. You can't have 61 WRC plus in a position that only bats. It's just unacceptable. But first base was almost equally as bad. So like you, I think I'm a believer in Encarnacion Strand. I think he can the man can hit. I think he's actually a decent glove too. So, but it wouldn't hurt my feelings if the Reds. I think one of the free agents that would fit the Reds' profile, what they need a veteran that can field, that can hit, would be Christian Walker. So he's one of the few first basemen that has just a really good glove. He gets on base well, hit for power, and that could solve a lot of the Reds' issues. And then maybe you could use CES as a DH, or figure that out via another means like a Jock Peterson. So basically, I just want to steal the Arizona Diamondbacks to kind of complete these issues, like a 1-year stopgap with Suarez at third, Christian Walker at first, and maybe Jock Peterson at DH. So those will be the three fitting free agent possibilities. But we all know Suarez, his option can get picked up, so it's not a guarantee that he's getting back on the market.
Yeah, Suarez is such a perfect fit for the Reds and the short deal at third base. Biggest challenge just with the first base and DH is, I mean, the numbers are terrible. There's no way around it, but you still have Jamer Candelario. I mean, I guess it would be nice if the Reds could find a way to creatively move his deal, but the chances of that happening are probably slim. So you're going to have him. You can't play him at third base, so he has to play first base or DH. I do not want CES blocked. I'm okay if CES comes to camp and doesn't play well and you option him out of AAA. I have no problem with that. But if he goes to camp and performs well and hits, I think he can be the best hitter on this entire team. I think he could maybe even put a better WRC plus than Ellie. I think that's a possibility. So there's two, and then if we're moving Jonathan Indy off of second base for Matt McLean, you could throw a third into that mix. And if you go out and get a left fielder in Spencer Steer, you could really throw a fourth into that mix. So there's a lot of complicated problems, and it feels like every piece that the Reds try to add, it's you have to figure out, okay, well, where does this other piece go? It's not just our left fielder was terrible. We need to send him down to the minor leagues and replace. Well, yeah, they were terrible, but we also still have all these other guys. And that's just what makes this offseason, I guess, fascinating, but also really just brutal to try to figure out what the Reds are going to do, because I have no idea. I've never had an offseason where I felt as clueless about what the Reds are going to try to do to attack this offseason.
That's exactly why I made this product, so I could kind of tee up your future content of, hey, what do the Reds have as far as their player development options, and your Edwin and Arroyos and whatnot, and some of the 40-man options you've discussed in the outfield. And then you have players returning to health, so your obvious candidates there with McLean and CES, as well as TJ Friedel, playing hurt for most of the year, as we talked about. But then you're going to have your free agent options as well as your trade candidates. So I think the Reds are going to be busy this offseason. I think they're sick of losing. I think Nick Kral's back's against the wall. He's got to prove himself that just can't go in with another 76-win season. The Reds fan base are starving for a winner, and I think the ownership group, and we'll go into the payroll stuff at a different time, but I think there's some indications over time that the Reds pick and choose their years they want to be serious. So if we start seeing a Nick Martinez qualifying offer and we start seeing some trades that absorb some salary, I think the Reds are going to be serious about competing in 25.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what the Reds spending will be this offseason. I've never felt more clueless about that because, like you said, they have picked and choose their spots and have spent aggressively. But as the people that are listening to this podcast, I also recorded this week earlier a podcast where I talked about the Bally Sports, now FanDuel Sports Network situation that continues to kind of hang a cloud on what the Reds are actually going to be getting revenue wise. So, but I do, James, think the Reds are going to make some significant trades this offseason. And I believe that they're going to trade 1, 2, maybe even 3 big league players off of this roster to try to make this puzzle piece fit better. I think there'll be a player traded that will make this fan base mad this offseason. That's my prediction right now. There'll be one player traded that people are going to go, why are you trading him? We don't have enough position players, but it's going to be the first move to create a better continuity roster wise.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun off season. I don't want to get too much into payroll stuff because you'll get me talking about that. But I think the Reds have significant payroll. So if they're serious about competing, you're looking at about 60 million the Reds could be spending this offseason. And that jumps up if they could dump Jamer Candelario on somebody that believes in him. So the Reds can make some significant acquisitions this year and kind of patch these holes that you're seeing in the position groups. So the Reds aren't that far from competing with their youthful group. It's kind of a challenge season for them too. They know they're entering. They're going from pre-arb years into the meaningful money-making years. So there's a lot for them to prove. You have players progressing towards free agency. They want to prove a lot. So I think I'm pretty high on the Reds for 2025. But yeah, I'm just really looking forward to seeing how they patch these holes.
Yeah, I'm high. I'm high on the Reds in 2025. Really, even if they just rolled out the same roster, I think that they would have a chance to compete. But it would really be nice if they shored up a lot of these holes and made the roster fit a lot better. And especially, please, just 1 year. Can I have a good defensive team? Okay, you know what? Can I have an average? Can I have an average defensive team? Because I mean, I think since Zach Kozart left, the Reds have been just atrocious defensively every single year, and it's just been brutal to watch. And I think a real silent killer. But yeah, we're gonna have you back on, James. You did this incredible analysis, digging through the payroll, and you're gonna try to explain this to me like I'm five because so much of this stuff I do not understand, but I would love to be educated a little bit more on. So we'll save that. We're gonna record that soon, and that'll get back out for you. But James, any other final thoughts for you before I let you get started on your day and I wrap up my day?
No, I really appreciate it. So thanks for humoring me. I kind of reached out of the blue. But yeah, I always enjoy talking about the Reds and thinking about the Reds. So hopefully this next year will be our year, man.
No, James, thank you. I really appreciate you reaching out. This has been a lot of fun. I think a lot of really good stuff for Reds fans to digest, and we will talk again soon.
Cheers, bud.